All right, welcome, my friends. We're live and we're here today to talk about something very close to my heart, and that is how to leverage your introvert strengths as a fundraiser so you can raise more money. All right, if we haven't met yet, my name is 𝗕𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗄𝗃, and I help fundraisers and nonprofit leaders raise more 5, 6, and 7-figure donations for their amazing missions. All right, so welcome, welcome. I see folks are joining us. I'd love to hear from you, my introvert friends and my introvert allies. Let me know, drop below, let me know where you are joining from and say hello. So if you are just joining us now, we're talking all about how introverts actually make some superstar fundraisers, and how if you're an introvert, or if you work with or you lead introverts, how you can support them to leverage their strengths to raise more money. Okay, so if you are just joining us for the replay, I'd also love to hear from you. You can go ahead and use the hashtag replay. So I am going to go ahead and get started and dive right in. So, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about introverts. So I wanted to start there. What do I actually mean when I'm talking about being an introvert versus being an extrovert? Because some of the misconceptions I've heard about introverts are, oh, we're really shy, we're really quiet, we hate networking. And that's not necessarily the case for all introverts. The way I like to think about being an introvert is this. This is one of my favorite definitions that I've read that I personally really identify with. Being an introvert simply means that you gather or regain or recharge your energy in a different way than extroverts do. So let's look at extroverts for a second. Our friends extroverts who also make excellent fundraisers, they have different strengths. They make excellent fundraisers for different reasons. But extroverts tend to gain their energy. They tend to recharge their energy through their interactions with other people, right? So spending time with other people, being in groups, that can really sort of rev an extrovert up. Introverts, not so much. It doesn't mean that we're not social. We still love having our relationships. We still, have our valued friends. But for extroverts, that interaction with others, even though we enjoy it, can tend to actually drain our energy, and we have to recharge our energy in different ways than extroverts. So introverts tend to need to recharge with a little more quiet time, a little more downtime, alone time, at home time. So it's just something to be aware of as an introvert, that your energy comes from different sources than extroverts, right? So I'll share a few personal experiences later on in my chat around how I came to realize through my fundraising that I was actually a little different than my extroverted fundraising colleagues, which doesn't mean better or worse, right? It just means we need to be aware of, as introvert fundraisers, what our strengths are, what our danger zones are, and act accordingly. So that's what today is all about. If you're just joining us, welcome, my friends. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Let us know where you're joining from. And if you identify as an introvert, I want you to raise your virtual hand. I want to know that you're here. All right, so let's dive in. I wanted to talk more actually about some of our strengths that make us really good fundraisers, and some of our strengths that actually make us excel as specifically as major gifts fundraisers. Hello, Leslie. Leslie is joining in and saying, I am trying to grow my introvert strengths. Congratulations. And there are so many. I'm just touching on a few today, but I hope that these resonate with you, because I think that introverts really do make some superstar fundraisers, and that's not often recognized enough. That's not recognized enough from my perspective. So let's kick it off and talk about how introverts really shine in one-on-one relationships. Introverts shine in one-on-one relationships. So how you may see this translate is introverts are great listeners, and they're also very observant. So I've seen introverts really excel, as I said, in one-to-one relationships, such as in developing major donor relationships, right? Because think about this. It's really all about building a relationship and getting to know and understand your donor a little bit better, right? So when you leverage those skills of our knack for active listening and also our really observant nature, those two together can be really very powerful when it comes to working with donors one-on-one. And for those of you who are in areas that you're not necessarily back to face-to-face meetings yet, I know there are a lot of us who are not back into face-to-face meetings yet, this can translate as well into virtual meetings, into phone calls, right? Your ability to listen and your observant nature can still, whether virtual or in person, be a really powerful strength to leverage. So hello, Tim. Hello, Sharon. I see lots of folks joining us now. So I want you to really think about that. And I want you to think about that when you are working with your donors and tapping into those superpowers of listening and being observant. And how are you going to use those strengths to really be strategic around building your relationships with donors, right? So here's a really good example. That combination of listening and observing can help you really hone in and understand better about what the donor's philanthropic priorities are. It can also help you be really smart about asking strategic questions, asking really strong follow-up questions. So these are all things for you to think about, and they're natural strengths, right? They're natural strengths. And hello, Christine. Christine says, looks like I'm an introvert too. Maybe folks are joining us now that are just starting to recognize themselves in some of my descriptions. I was a late blooming introvert, or I guess I came to understand I was an introvert fairly late in life. So I definitely identify with that. So yes, so that's what I really wanted to start off with, is this idea of your powerful abilities when it comes to being one-on-one with donors. So think about that. Think about leveraging listening, observing, and using those to build really deep and meaningful connections with your donors by looking out for and recognizing what their motivations are, what their philanthropic priorities are, and just asking those really smart, strategic, and follow-up questions to help you kind of build on that understanding. All right, so the second one thing or strength I wanted to speak about, which is kind of connected, is that we as introverts have a real ability to deeply focus and concentrate. And I want to say, I think this is a skill that's so valuable nowadays. And I read a great book recently by 𝗕𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗃 called Deep Focus. I don't know if any of you have read that. So it's a really great read if you're an introvert. I'm guessing Cal is probably an introvert too. But Cal writes about how it is one of the most valuable skills and how it's actually a disappearing or diminishing skill to be able to deeply focus and concentrate for longer periods of time. Makes sense, right? Because we live and work in a distraction economy. There's constantly demands on our time and demands on our attention, whether from email or social media or smartphone alerts. So our ability as introverts to really deeply focus and concentrate is absolutely a superpower. And 𝗕𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗃 says it's probably actually one of the most valuable skills moving forward, because you're able to really sit down and engage in complex work and complex strategy and wrestle with challenging problems. And it is an increasingly valuable skill because it is unfortunately diminishing in so many people given the environment that we live in. Now, I want to recognize for a lot of us, granted, focus has been impacted quite severely of late, but that's our temporary context in terms of, for those of us in lockdown, here where I am, we're in lockdown again, and kids are home and learning remotely. So that is obviously going to have an impact on your ability to focus. But what it doesn't impact is that innate strength or the innate skill that's inside you as an introvert that you can leverage, right? Even though our temporary situation has an impact. Oh, thank you, Tim. Tim is just dropping a link to, I love this interactive group. Tim is just dropping a link to Cal's book, Deep Work. So it's very much a worthwhile read for sure. I want to add on to that idea around deep focus and concentration, where I've seen it really practically impact relationship building with donors, is one place where introverts think we actually don't excel. I've heard a lot of introverts fundraisers say, I feel very challenged by large group events where, you know, I have to be outgoing and work the room. And I want to ask you to think about reframing that next time you're at a big group event or a big donor event, because here's a place you can leverage your superpowers as well. If you want to think about that strength of deep focus and concentration, where I've found that I really excel is the ability to connect very deeply with one person at a large event. So I use my ability to focus and concentrate to make the person I'm talking to feel like the only person in the room. So think about that as an introvert and maybe reframe that if you're like, ooh, those big events, you know, I don't excel at them. You do excel at them in a different way than our extrovert colleagues, because you're able to actually focus in on your conversation with one individual person and be really concentrated on what that person is saying to you, despite all the excitement that's going on around. Okay, so here's a challenge our extrovert colleagues sometimes have, is that like there's so much going on, right? So it's like, oh, you know, there's someone over there I want to talk to, right? There's a different set of strengths that makes extroverts good at, for example, working the room at a big event. But, you know, don't forget, we have our different strengths, right? And working the room might be fine, but I am pretty happy with my ability to be able to focus in really closely and make the person I'm talking to feel like they're the only person in the room, using my abilities of concentration and focus. So shift that frame for you there a little bit if you are someone who feels like that you don't excel at group events, you just excel at them in different ways, right? So that's a great way to look at your introvert strengths, I think. All right. So if you're just joining us, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. We're talking all about how to leverage your introvert strengths to raise more money. And I'd love to hear from you. Say hello. Let us know where you're joining from below. And raise your virtual hand if you identify as an introvert as well. All right. I also wanted to talk about, before I talk about some of our danger zones, because we do have areas we need to keep an eye on as fundraisers and as introverts in general, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of focus extending to not being overly prone to shiny object syndrome. Okay, I think shiny object syndrome is a bit of a problem in fundraising today. It's very easy to kind of leap from opportunity to new platform to, you know, new digital thing to new social media thing. And introverts really tend to actually use that ability to focus in and concentrate and think more strategically to stay the course. Does that make sense? So once we've decided to do something, we stay the course. And I think that's a real value now, because typically if you think about something like major gifts and working with major donors, that is not necessarily that's a long game, right? That's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I think our ability as introverts to really concentrate, stay the course, be strategic, and not be tempted to chase the latest and greatest shiny object really positions us well for doing that long-term work around relationship building with donors and that long-term fundraising work that takes a little longer to pay off, like major gifts and like working with major donors. So welcome, Sandy. Welcome, Kara. I'm so glad you're able to join us. And I'm so happy that this topic resonates with so many introvert fundraisers. There are many more of us than you realize, and we are, in fact, very good at many different elements of fundraising and can leverage those strengths accordingly to raise more money for sure. So let me talk a little bit more about our danger zones, or I'll call them things that we need to be aware of as introvert fundraisers. And this can just really help you manage some of the challenges we can sometimes have. I think the first one I want to talk about is reflecting back on what I had previously said about being in groups, being in large groups and large group events. Introverts do find those challenging for certain reasons, right? And I think the main issue is that large group activities can tend to drain introverts, right? We talked about that at the beginning, is where do we derive our energy from? What are our sources of energy? For our extrovert friends, it is other people, it's large groups of people. So they might leave one of those group events and feel like jazzed up and energetic and they want to go to the next thing. For those of us who are introverts, we may enjoy those events, but we tend to be drained by them from an energy perspective. I realized this very acutely when I was working in a larger healthcare context, and we tended to have a lot of amazing evening events for our donors, and so it was not unusual, like even as much as once a week, to spend an evening at the hospital at a donor event. And those events are wonderful. I always enjoyed them a ton, and I leveraged those introvert strengths to have some really great conversations with donors and with prospects. But what I would find is the next morning when I came into the office, oh my goodness, my extrovert colleagues, they'd be all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I'd be on like my third coffee and feeling just feeling just fairly low energy, right? So that was when I realized that as an introvert, I do need that time to recharge. I find it a little challenging to sort of do the real back-to-back. I find it challenging sometimes the next day after a large group event. I do feel a little more tired, and that's just pretty natural, I think, as an introvert, and it's not a problem. It's just something to be aware of, right? So being aware that you need a little bit of downtime to re-energize before and after events is just a useful piece of information from my perspective, right? It's a useful self-reflection. And while you don't, we don't always have time to take like big chunks of time off before or after events or group gatherings, we can't build in smaller chunks of time, right? We can build in smaller chunks of time just to recharge. So think about the day after an event, make sure to take your lunch break, get out of the office, take a spin around the block. I know not everyone's in the office right now, but do those things that help you recharge a little bit. Spending even 10 or 15 minutes in nature. I say that as someone who lives in a very urban environment. So spending time in nature means going to like a local city park. But doing those things and knowing what things actually recharge you, even doing those in small increments, can be very helpful for you to recover and recharge your energy after group events. So I think one of my key takeaways for you is really know thyself and embrace this, right? It's not a good or a bad thing. We just operate differently than our extrovert colleagues. And so no, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you, especially if you're in a team that's largely extroverted. If everybody's bounding around the day after a big event and you're feeling a little more subdued, a little more tired, that's just our introvert natures kicking in. And we just need to manage that as best we can by finding little ways to plug in and recharge again. All right, my related area or area to sort of watch out for, just be careful about over scheduling. And I also learned this the hard way in that I would try and be really efficient by booking meetings back to back to back to back. And I realize now that I can't necessarily do that, and that I find I don't perform at my best when I've got, say like 3 or 4 consecutive donor meetings. I tried that before to be efficient, and I'm like, I'm going to be in this area, so I'm going to try and line up a large number of donor meetings without any breaks in between. Not necessarily the most strategic move if you are an introvert. Now, again, you don't necessarily need a huge amount of time to recover during meetings. What I've done is I actually build in a 15-minute buffer between all of my meetings. So I do quite a few, for example, stakeholder interviews when I'm working with consulting clients. So I have my schedule set up so it automatically builds in a 15-minute buffer time between my appointments. And I use that buffer time just to sort of debrief myself after one meeting, maybe take some notes, you know, do a little bit of deep breathing, grab a cup of tea, and then I'm ready for my next meeting. So think about building in the buffer time that you need to recover between your appointments. Because again, if you think, let's say you have 3 or 4 appointments in an afternoon, you know, it's not a big deal building in 15 minutes between, and it's a useful investment of time if you are going to be a little more recharged, if you are going to be, you know, if you are going to be doing your best, right, at each of those meetings. So I really encourage you to avoid that sort of overscheduling and avoid the real back-to-back if you can at all possible. Even just building in a 10 to 15 minute buffer can be a, you know, a great thing for us as introverts to get that recharge time. Final thing I wanted to talk about is the importance of being really purposeful about taking action as an introvert. One thing I've noticed is as introverts, we tend to have a bit of a tendency to perhaps over prepare or over research things. So you want to watch out for that. I see that happening oftentimes in major gift fundraising, is that someone may be working with a donor and is just taking a lot of time and never feel sure about moving to the next step. So let's say you've got a donor, you're cultivating that donor, you're getting ready to make an ask. There can be a risk for us as introverts, unless we're very purposeful, to get caught in the over-researching cycle. This is not exclusive to introverts, but it is a higher risk to us. So we're over-researching, we're over-preparing, and perhaps not getting to that point where we need to make the crucial ask. So here is a good fix for that I have found, is that I'm just really good at creating plans for myself and setting deadlines for myself. And I want to recommend that you do that as well, right? So make sure that if you are, you know, if you are thinking about something, we'll continue that example. If you do know that it's going to be time soon to make a solicitation of a donor you've been working with, you need to know and be aware of the risk that you might get caught in that cycle of over preparing or over researching, and just set yourself a deadline. Set yourself a deadline and say, okay, by this date, that is when this is going to happen. I'm actually going to end the research phase, and I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get in touch with that donor, I'm going to book a date to have a meeting with them. So giving yourself a bit more structure, being a little more purposeful about setting deadlines for yourself, setting goals and actions for yourself, and knowing that there can be a bit of a tendency to shift into over preparation or over research mode can be really helpful for you, just to get out of that danger zone or spot that potential issue before it happens. This may also be helpful for you if you lead introverts, or you have colleagues who are introverts, is just helping support them, to kind of, you know, set target dates to get things done by, so that we're not you know, so that we're not over researching or over preparing for things. So again, yeah, this is something, well, here's a great example, is that I, you know, am live right now speaking with you, and there could be a risk that I perhaps over prepared for this. So what I do is I actually schedule a set specific and limited amount of time for me to create an outline before I go live, and that's all I've got. So I've got that time, and I work on that. And the lovely thing about going live is I made a commitment to you. I'm going to be here at a specific time talking about this particular topic. So when I hit go live, it's a natural deadline that's built in. So I want to encourage you to think about things like this. You know, think about challenging yourself a little bit. Another example related to this video is, you know, I think introverts often think like, I don't want to be on live video. It's not something I find very natural, but I think challenging yourself to grow can be really helpful, and challenging yourself just to get over some of those limiting beliefs about who you are and what you can or can't do as an introvert can be very helpful. Video, to continue that example, one of the things that I do is think about leveraging my introvert strengths when thinking about being on live video. I just think about talking to one person when I'm on video. So it's really just me and you right now. It's me and you. having a one-to-one conversation. And that for me as an introvert feels like much more comfortable than thinking about, oh, I'm on stage and potentially countless people can see me right now. So just think about, when you know yourself and you're leveraging those strengths, is how can you bring those strengths to everything you do, even things that may feel a bit challenging, like going live on video, is that you do have strengths that actually loan themselves really well. You have strengths that loan themselves really well to do things even that may feel a little more challenging, like being on live video. So I want to leave you with that. I hope you found our conversation today helpful. And I'm so happy to see how many people have shown up. I think that this is a topic that definitely needs more exploration. There's a lot of us around who are introverts, who are fundraising. And I think conventional wisdom says that our extrovert colleagues are better at it than we are, but I beg to differ, because I think we as introverts have so many amazing strengths that we can leverage in every aspect of our fundraising. And I want to really encourage you to do that as well. So I'd love to hear from you. What have you found most valuable about our conversation today? Go ahead and drop that below. Let me know. And I would love to stay in touch with you. So if we're not already connected, I hope you make sure you check out my website at 𝗕𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗲𝗃.com. You can subscribe to my email there, or just stay in touch via Facebook or LinkedIn for more of these conversations about how to leverage your strengths as an introvert fundraiser. All right, my friends, I will see you again soon. Now go out there, and leverage those strengths to raise more money for your amazing mission. And thank you again for joining me. I'm really honored to have you here for this conversation. Oh, I love this. A final quote to close from Shanna, from Susan Cain, who writes the wonderful book Quiet, I think I'm saying that correctly, about introverts. Susan Cain says, "Everyone shines given the right lighting." I love that. And that's like video too. Everyone shines given the right lighting, my friends. So go ahead and get out there and shine and find your right lighting. And I will see you again next time.